What is the plan for Zebeck in the future? Even asking the question sounds strange. After all, Zebeck is supposed to be dead, right? Well, we're already in the final saga of One Piece, and not even in the first arc, but already in the second. For some reason, Oda has now decided to finally reveal Zebeck of all places, in the Loki and Harold flashback, which by now almost feels like a Zebeck flashback. The point is, Oda has finally ready to reveal more about Zebeck. And in chapter 1155, we learned some extremely interesting things about him. Zebeck was on Mary Geoise, and he didn't just kill an admiral there. He also visited and, in a way, challenged a very specific figure, none other than Imu. Zebeck was apparently unable to overthrow Imu and declare himself the king of the world. But he did leave words for Imu. He told Imu that he would one day return. And that is a very interesting statement, especially considering how late we are in the story right now. It's possible that Zebeck returned at some point afterward, perhaps before God Valley, or maybe God Valley was supposed to be the beginning of that plan, but he failed. The thing is, statements like that usually serve as setup for a later confrontation, at least when they come from serious and truly important characters. But what if we assume that such a meeting didn't happen before God Valley, nor after? Then what? Nothing. Zebeck failed, and his words meant absolutely nothing. That's hard to imagine, I must say. As I see it, there are mainly three options. Option 1 is that nothing happens at all. They were just empty words. Zebeck met an early end at God Valley, and that's that. Option 2 is that Blackbeard accomplishes what his father couldn't. And since we're already talking about Zebeck's son, option 2.5, the other possible son, the one true gold buggy, takes over in place of Zebeck and Blackbeard. But seriously now, I don't know whether Oda is just playing around with the wanted posters of both of them, or if there's actually something more behind it. I've talked in the past about the theory that Buggy could possibly be a son of Zebeck, but with the newer information, I might make another video on that, we'll see. Let's move on to the third option. This one is that Zebeck himself will fulfill his promise. Of all the options, this is naturally the one that most directly matches what Zebeck actually meant with his words. At the same time, let's say the most elaborate option. For this to happen, Zebeck must either still be alive or somehow return to life. That possibility does exist, but it doesn't make the whole thing any less complicated. First, let's take a closer look at option 1. What speaks in favor of nothing at all happening? In my view, not much. You could frame it so that Zebeck simply failed in the face of this monumental task, but even then, I would expect Oda to at least present it in a way where Blackbeard tries to take Zebeck's place. Of course, he could fail too. That would still be a way to use this plot point, and honestly, that's the minimum I would expect. After all, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we are in the final saga of One Piece, a series with over 1,150 chapters. And we're not even in the first arc anymore, we're right in the middle of the second. Oda has been building up Zebeck for years as a major figure, and has held back on revealing him until now. For him to then deliver such a serious statement, only for nothing to come of it, that would be very surprising. Sure, it could be used as a plot device to emphasize the overwhelming power of the world government, but even in that case, it would be much more meaningful if Blackbeard at least tried to follow in his father's footsteps, and was also stopped before reaching his goal, only for Luffy to finally succeed in the end. Now, let's talk specifically about the option where Blackbeard takes on Zebeck's role. As I said, it's possible that Blackbeard tries and simply fails like Zebeck did, perhaps even long before he ever gets close to Mary Geoise, for example, in a battle against Luffy. But it's also entirely possible that Blackbeard will succeed. The interesting question in that case is, what exactly would that mean for the story? For Blackbeard to do so, he would have to travel to Mary Geoise and make it all the way to the Room of Flowers. If he truly wants to fulfill his father's promise in spirit, he would also need to overthrow Imu. Even though Blackbeard has played a role for a long time and stirred up quite a bit of chaos from the perspective of the Straw Hats and to a certain extent from our perspective as readers, he's mostly been operating in the background. He's never really been the main focus, not on Jaya, not in Impel Down, not during Marineford, and not even now in the New World. He's done a lot of things, sure, but nothing that has directly and unavoidably put him on a collision course with the Straw Hats. Not even the fact that he handed over Ace. The battle that resulted from it was primarily handed over to the Marines. Blackbeard only appeared at the very end, when the fight was almost over and Luffy was already unconscious. We of course assume there will be a fight, and we can be quite certain that one will happen, but from the Straw Hats' perspective, it's not set in stone. On top of that, there's currently nothing that would inevitably trigger a conflict. The Straw Hats had clear reasons to go after Big Mom and Kaido, but as things stand right now, they don't have any urgent reason to move against Blackbeard. You could bring up Garp as a possible reason, but Garp could very well be rescued by other means, and his situation isn't one that currently forces Luffy to act. Even Shanks, for example, as far as we know, doesn't currently possess a road poneglyph, which would make conflict with the Straw Hats unavoidable. But at least he and Luffy have their promise, which makes some sort of confrontation between them quite likely. Or maybe clash is the better word here than full-blown conflict. Either way, the point is, with Blackbeard there's nothing like that, which is all the more interesting when you consider everything he has done. Actions that affect Luffy far more directly than some others. He defeated Ace and handed him over to the Marines. He killed Whitebeard along with several members of the Whitebeard pirates. He attacked Baltigo, currently holds Garp hostage, and destroyed Law's crew, with only Law and Beepo managing to escape. Before that, he attacked Hancock and held Kobe captive. All of these are things that affect Luffy's family, or friends, and yet from the Straw Hat's point of view, Blackbeard is not currently on an unavoidable collision course with them. We, as readers, are convinced that the same does not apply from Blackbeard's side, but from the Straw Hat's perspective, that isn't necessarily true. And of course, that's far from everything. As mentioned earlier, with all this build-up, we can be quite certain that a fight will happen. But Oda could have teased and hyped up the fight between Luffy and Blackbeard much more than he actually has. It makes me wonder, is the reason Oda hasn't done that or hasn't done it yet because Blackbeard will one day be completely taken over by Zebeck? Or could it be that Oda is planning for Luffy to fight Blackbeard twice, once as Blackbeard and once as Zebeck? It could go something like this. Luffy and Blackbeard fight for the One Piece. Blackbeard loses, and his will is so completely shattered by the loss that Zebeck is able to fully take over his body. Luffy claims the One Piece. Then comes the battle against the world government, the battle against Imu, and that's when Zebeck reappears the stronger, final form of Blackbeard. That would be especially interesting, considering that Zebeck and the Gorosei were introduced around the same time, not counting the very early reference to the Gorosei on Drum Island. For a long time, the Gorosei seemed to be the most powerful force within the world government, until it was revealed that Imu is actually the one pulling the strings. Similarly, Blackbeard has long been seen, at least if this idea proves true, as the main antagonist on the pirate side, only for Zebeck to ultimately take over. A figure who, just like Imu, was introduced during the Reverie arc. It's worth noting, Zebeck made his vow to Imu during a reverie as well. If Oda really is heading in this direction, then it would make perfect sense why Blackbeard hasn't already been put on a more direct collision course with the Straw Hats, and why his upcoming fight with Luffy hasn't received more explicit build-up. Because he might only represent the first phase of the true final boss battle, and Oda may not want to load too many expectations onto the fight with Blackbeard himself. After all, something even bigger might follow, involving Zebeck taking over his body. And that could be why Oda is currently diving deeper into Zebeck's backstory to set the stage for what's coming. I mean, even as things stand now, there are already a lot of expectations riding on the fight against Blackbeard. But just imagine if the Straw Hats had been talking about having to fight Blackbeard ever since Fishman Island, and it had been highlighted again and again, even just in passing. And then Blackbeard loses, only to be taken over by another pirate maybe, that would lead to too much disappointment. But that's just one of many possible outcomes. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments. Until we learn more on that front, here are some other videos I recommend checking out. With that said, see you next time. Bye.